Hi, and very warm welcome from Vision Australia. Thank you all for joining us today to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day with this very special webinar on color accessibility best practices. My name is Shimona, and I am a product manager for digital access training here at Vision Australia. We're just going to start this session with an acknowledgement of country. So Vision Australia acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples as the first Australians and the traditional owners of the land across our working area. We pay our respects to elders both past and present and future in maintaining their cultures, countries, and spiritual connections to the lands and waters. Vision Australia acknowledges and respects the genuine diversity and richness of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander cultures across Australia. And today I am actually speaking to you from the Convey tribal land of the Bundjalung Nation, also known as the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. So next slide. If you are attending this webinar from Australia as well, next slide please. If you're attending this webinar from Australia as well, would love if you would like to acknowledge the land that you are on. You can drop that in the chat. And just so you know, the keyboard shortcut to open and shut your chat window is for Windows, it is Alt-H, and Mac, it's Command-Shift-H. And if you are attending from outside of Australia, we would really love to know where you are in the world. So please drop that in the chat as well. Tell us where you are in the world. It would be really fantastic. It's going to take a minute to think the chat, just make sure the chat is working. You might need some tech assistance. Apologies, everyone. If anyone has any ideas on how to fix our chat problems, please also let us know, maybe. If not, what we're going to do is we will just use the Q&A because the Q&A seems to be working, and some of you are already taking initiative to drop in your countries and tribal nations in the chat. Thank you so much. Apologies for this. We will try to fix the chat and let you know when that is fixed. But we will move on to the next part, which is just a quick introduction about who we are. So in case you have never heard of us before, our team's name is Digital Access, and we are actually a team within this Vision Australia. We are actually global leaders in digital accessibility, and we specialize in WCAG audits, conformance reports. I won't list you the whole heap of services, but basically we specialize in digital accessibility services, strategy, consulting, a bunch of different things, accessibility training and coaching. If you're interested, you can get in touch with us and talk to us after this as well. But more recently also, we have actually started digital access training, which is an on-demand platform which is focused on accessibility training that you can access anytime and anywhere. And we have had some feedback, even though we are very new. People have been saying that our courses are easy to digest, easy to learn, well suited to their busy work and life commitments, and also that we have very essential courses to help with creating inclusive online content. So we're going to zoom right into our presentation very soon, but before we begin, I just want to make sure everyone is clear on our little housekeeping norms. So some things that you should know. First of all, you would have gotten a little bit of a notice when you came onto this webinar that this session is recorded. So if you are not comfortable speaking, you don't need to come on the mic at all. That will be available at the end of during the Q&A. And we also have live captions and transcript available. So if you want to access that, you can do so by clicking within your Zoom controls. You can also use keyboard shortcuts. Windows is Window key plus Window key Control L, and Mac is Control Command L to toggle your captions on and off. Please keep your mic off during the presentations, which I think you will have no power to turn it on until the Q&A anyway. But when we reach the Q&A, hopefully our chat will be working soon. And in the meantime, let's try to keep the Q&A box a little bit quiet with chatter. We'll keep it just to any questions during the presentation itself. So as the presentation is going on, if you have really burning questions, you can drop that in the chat, and we do have someone to answer those. Sorry, not the chat, in the Q&A box, and we have someone to help with that as well. Just so you know, the Q&A at the end of this whole session will be 15 minutes, hopefully. And during that time, we will open up for questions, but we also have some questions that we will address that we took in when you signed up for this webinar. So we have a few questions prepared to address, and then we will open it up to the floor. And we also have a little secret at the end, which I cannot say what it is until the end. So hopefully you stay all the way to the end and get this fun little secret, because I promise it's a really great surprise. And on to introducing to you our speaker for today. It's a very special person because he is my boss, but more than that, he's also a really fantastic person and very well experienced in the digital accessibility space. So this is Josh Crawford, National Manager of Digital Access, Vision Australia. And Josh has consulted on over 200 accessibility projects to businesses across Australia. He has designed many of our training courses and more in inclusive design and accessibility. So you are in fantastic hands, and I'm going to hand over to him right now. Josh, here you go. Oh, Josh, your mic is not on. We have a bunch of tech issues today. I'm sorry, everyone. Just be patient with us while Josh fixes his mic. It was just working a while ago before you all got here, I guess. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Okay, there we go. I've been released. I think there was something wrong with it, saying I couldn't be a host. Yeah, so Shimona, thanks very much for that introduction. It was really lovely. It's really exciting to be here today for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'm excited to be here to present. I was really surprised when we put this little webinar out that it sold out in 2 days. So I really appreciate everybody registering, and I do really encourage you to attend other events going on. I know there's a lot of events happening around the world, so I do really appreciate you making the decision and taking the time out to attend ours. So I'm going to move on to the material straight away because we don't have a lot of time to get through everything. Color accessibility is such a huge topic. I think it's a really good topic as well for several reasons. The first one is that it's often the entry point for people into digital accessibility. So often color is a little bit less technical and more sort of accessible to everyone. It's something that everybody can use. And on top of that, there's still a lot of issues, which we'll talk about in a second, with color accessibility. So we're still finding a lot of websites, and whether it's documents or information, whatever it is, that have poor color accessibility within them. And it can make a huge impact to a wide range of people, no matter what their disability is or who they are. Okay, so I'm going to start off with what is color accessibility. So if we really define it at a high level, color accessibility is the practice of using color in ways that makes it easier for everyone to see and understand. And I've got on this slide just a picture of a accessible color combination generator that's displaying some different colors and text, and it can let you sort of look at what the color contrast is of those different combinations. Lots of people benefit from color accessibility. It can be people with vision loss, people with cognitive and learning disabilities, people from different countries and cultures to us. So across different countries and cultures, some colors have different meaning, and we attach different connotations with them. People experiencing temporary and situational impairments, that's pretty much everyone. We encounter temporary disabilities, all of us, throughout our lives. Could be a broken arm, it could be an eye infection, whatever it is. And situational impairments we're encountering almost all the time, I think, throughout the day, whether it's somebody texting us while we're writing an email, or a baby crying in the background, or a loud building site next door. There's lots of different situational impairments we encounter. And I think it's actually pretty rare that we sort of looking at a screen and it's a quiet room. Looking maybe at a large screen with a quiet room, it's a pretty rare scenario. We're often looking at our phones and multitasking, and there's lots of things going in the background as well that can impact our ability to see colors or the legibility of the screen. Okay, so moving on to the best practices. We're going to talk about two key best practices in color accessibility today. So firstly, we're going to look at using good color contrast. And then we're also going to look at providing alternative cues for color as well. So using good color contrast as our first best practice. Before I go into the practice, I'll just briefly describe what color contrast is for anybody in the room who maybe doesn't know what it is, or it's quite new to them. So color contrast describes the difference in light, otherwise known as luminance, between two colors. And then we have a thing called a color contrast ratio, which is the numerical value we give to color contrast. So that's how we kind of measure it. And there's lots of different formulas out there to measure contrast in different ways. And on the slide, we've got an image. And if we look at a combination of black and white, that's going to have really high contrast. Whereas when we turn to black and dark gray as the two colors, the contrast lowers. And that can impact things like legibility and readability of text. It can impact our ability to navigate if we're sighted through websites. And it can also impact the ability to see things like form fields and icons and other elements as well. So why should we use good color contrast? So firstly, it's going to help ensure that your designs are legible and readable for your audience, whoever you're designing or doing some work for. It can foster positive and calming emotions. So there is a relationship between contrast and potentially mental health, as well as the colors you choose. And also it can help achieve conformance to WCAG and legislation as well. If you don't know what WCAG is, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's a internationally recognized standard that's referenced in lots of countries in legislation and things like that. It's also really important. There was a 2024 sample of the top 1 million websites completed by WebAIM. So that's a report they put out recently. I think they've been doing this report for a number of years. And they found low contrast text on 81% of homepages. So that's huge. That's basically most websites have low contrast text on their homepage. And on top of that, from my understanding, the numbers increased compared to last year. So we need to do a much better job, whether you're a designer or whether in a project manager, whoever you are, whatever work you're doing, we need to make sure that we are doing a really good job with color contrast, because it can have a huge impact. And often it's not a lot of effort as well. It doesn't require lots of coding or specific technical knowledge. It just requires a good understanding of how to what the requirements are and how to apply them. So we start with the recommended minimum contrast for text. This is to meet WCAG level AA. And it sounds kind of technical and kind of complex, but when it comes down to it is fairly simple. What they're saying is that, or what the requirement is that if you've got some text, it's got a normal font weight and it's less than 18 points in size, then it needs to have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 against the background color. And on this slide, we have some text that meets that requirement. So it's yellow text against a blue background, and it's got a contrast ratio that's larger than 4.5 to 1, and it's a normal font weight. Now, if we make the text larger, so we make it larger than 18 points, for example, or if we make it bold and it's larger than 14 points, then the requirements say that the contrast ratio can be decreased a little bit. So it can needs to have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1. Doesn't mean you shouldn't aspire to more than 4.5:1 still. But the reason they're saying that, or the reason that the requirement is less, is decreased contrast, is that bold text, the lines are thicker, which means that the text in theory should become more legible. And with large text, the text is larger. So once again, it should also become a bit more legible. So there's three sort of considerations in summary with text. We need to look at the size of the text, and then if it's less than 18 points, it needs to have a contrast ratio of less than at least 4.5:1. Or we can take that text and make it bold or larger than 18 points, and then the contrast ratio can be decreased a little bit to meet that requirement of at least 3:1. It's not just text. So text is a big part of the color contrast requirements, but there's lots of other elements we need to consider as well. I'm not going to go through all of these. That's a whole course in itself. And as we'll be talking about a little bit, we actually have just today announced the launch of a course that's focused purely on color contrast. But some other elements you do want to consider are things like icons, particularly functional icons, like a button. It could be a shopping cart or a search button. And also the borders around form fields, like text boxes. They also need a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 against the background color. And it's actually amazing to see the impact of just such a small change if you do increase the contrast of these things. I remember doing usability testing of a superannuation website in Australia, and we were doing some testing with people who had low vision. And the first step to become a member of this superannuation fund, for anyone who doesn't know what that is around the world, that's sort of where Australians put their retirement savings in for when they retire. And the first step was to enter your email address. And I remember all the low vision participants, they couldn't actually find the spot to enter their email address because the borders around the text box were too low contrast. So it sounds like such a small thing, probably to change the contrast of it, but the impact's huge. The amount of members that were prevented to become a member, or maybe they had to phone up to become a member, might have been quite a large number of people who couldn't even just get through that first point in the process. There's lots of different types of color contrast checking tools out there. We've got software applications. So I've got an example of one of those on the slides. It's called the TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer. That's freely available. I really recommend downloading that one. It's one of my favorite ones. We also have browser and software plugins. So it could be, for example, a plugin for your browser that can test color contrast. Similar with if you're using Figma, for example, to design a website or an app. You can also install plugins into that application. If you're not allowed to install software and extensions, there are also online checkers. So you can visit a website like the WebAIM website, and they've got a free contrast checker where you can just manually enter colors in, and it will tell you what the contrast ratio is. And if it passes or doesn't meet the WCAG requirements. And finally, we have integrated checkers. And I think these are increasingly becoming available. So for example, Microsoft Word in the Office 365, I think it's the latest version, it's got a integrated contrast checker. So for anybody who has that, when you put some low contrast text into Word, it actually identifies that it might be too low contrast. These features are generally pretty basic. They might not give you a high level of detail, but they can sort of let you quickly assess or flag issues potentially with a document you're working on, or whatever sort of software you're using. Okay, so that's it around color contrast. The second best practice we're going to look at is providing alternative cues. So what are alternative cues? These are ways of communicating color or the meaning of color without actually using color itself. And that can benefit lots of different people. It could be somebody who's blind so that they literally cannot see the color on the screen. It could be somebody who has color vision deficiency, or the layman's term, which we often use, is color blindness. And that might be that they are unable to perceive all colors or some colors. It could be a case of they have trouble distinguishing between colors as well, specific colors. So to cater for that type of audience, there are lots of different ways we can make color accessible to them. Two of the key ways are providing text labels for the color. So we've got an example on the slides of doing this. We have a color selector. There's black, blue, and brown. So 3 circles with those colors filled in. And then they've also each got a text label, black, blue, or brown. So you don't need to be able to necessarily perceive the color or see the color to be able to select that color. And similar with icons, I still see this as a common issue on data tables or anybody presenting data where we're representing an increase or a decrease. Where, say, if you've got the color red, that might be representing a decrease. In this instance, it's a percentage decrease. And there's a little arrow pointing downwards next to it. And then for the increase, the color's green, and there's a green arrow next to it as well, pointing upwards. By using that icon, the down or the up, we're basically making it accessible to somebody who may not be able to see those colors. So it's making it very clear that it is a decrease or it's an increase without just relying on color alone. So that's a really another important consideration with color accessibility is providing alternative cues. Don't ever just rely on color to communicate information. You need to look at other visual cues you can provide. And I'm also interested in audio cues potentially, which we might talk about in a little bit, that can act as an alternative cue to just using color alone. Okay, so that's it for the best practices. Now we're going to look at 2 common mistakes that we still often see, whether it's websites or documents or apps or whatever it is. So one of the first common mistakes, and this can often be seen by people who are fairly new to accessibility or the WCAG requirements, is that some people think the higher the contrast, the better. So they look at the contrast ratio and they say, we need to get to the absolute highest number we can. And that might be true if your audience is, specifically people who have low vision or some form of vision loss, or where it's really important that it is high contrast. Maybe safety's involved as well. However, if you do use it for things like paragraphs of text or body copy, and it's very high contrast in text, then that can cause eye strain for some people, and it can make the text difficult to read. Really high contrast color schemes can also impact mental health and cause discomfort as well. So they can make people feel stressed or kind of on edge when they look at the screen. So if you do have a general audience, you want to make sure you use high contrasting colors only for small elements. So things like buttons, use them as navigational aids. So identify, what's a link? I can say it's a button. There's an error message. Those kinds of things to help people guide through your design. But don't use it, as a background color for lots of text or things like that. Because you're going to create a lot of visual stress for some people. Even some people have low vision who have done usability testing for, have complained about really, really high contrast text at times. So that's something just to be really careful with. Don't just go high contrast the better. You still want for good, strong contrast, but in some instances, not too high. Leave that for the smaller elements. And the second one I'm going to mention is not supporting accessibility settings. I think prior to this session, we actually had a question around supporting dark mode and high contrast mode and things like that. No matter, we could do all of the work in the world to have really good color contrast, but some people are going to need to personalize the color scheme still using accessibility settings. So for some people, they turn on a mode called high contrast mode. That often makes the text white or yellow, creates a black background. These settings are generally freely available on your devices. So they're available on Windows or Mac, on iPhones, Android devices. You can turn these settings on. And I do recommend you do that as a test after today. But then as designers or creating some kind of work, we need to make sure we are supporting this. So the first technique around that is really avoiding using images of text. So an image of text is when you create some text, say in Photoshop or could be anything, PowerPoint, take a screen capture, whatever it is, Canva, and then you drop it into a website or a document or something like that. The issue with images of text is that when somebody turns on a setting like high contrast mode, it actually won't adjust the colors to whatever their needs are. The image will sort of stay the same. And the second test you want to do is just ensure that your work is supporting accessibility settings. So it can be challenging in some scenarios. Websites, as far as my understanding is that It's still not a really strong way that's supported by all browsers to support high contrast mode. So for example, I think our website works quite reliably in Windows if you turn on high contrast, but on an iPhone, I don't think it's as reliable. But certainly with apps, you can support high contrast mode quite easily if it's been coded well. And it's amazing the amount of apps we see today that still don't support these kinds of settings, which is a bit disappointing. So that's it for today's presentation. A bit of a wrap up of what we've covered. So the first key takeaway that I want you to take away with this is that color accessibility is the practice of using color in ways that make it easy for everyone to see and understand. So you really that's a really important concept for accessibility, and it can have a huge impact for all your design work. You also want to use good color contrast to improve the legibility and readability of your designs. So color contrast is a really great technique to make whether it's a product you're working on or some information you're designing more accessible to lots of people. And also provide alternative cues for color to convey meaning and purpose. So really try to avoid using color and just color alone to communicate some piece of information, whether it's, this is a link, so it's clickable, or, here's a color in a chart, but there's no kind of alternative way to get the meaning of that color outside of looking at the color. So what are the next steps I ask you to do? This is my call to action for you. If you're new to color accessibility, really want to encourage you to keep learning. So explore our courses about color accessibility to help deepen your knowledge. If you're advanced, so already knew some of this stuff, I still encourage you to check out our courses. We've got 4 courses we'll be releasing. Some of them are set at a more advanced level, like things like creating an accessible color palette. And there's a sort of assumed basic understanding of color accessibility before you start one of those courses. Also recommend you review something you've worked on for color. So check the color accessibility of it. Have you used color alone to communicate something? It could even be something like a project status report. I see these all the time. Someone will say, like, I've highlighted the cells, where we're behind in schedule. They're highlighted in red. That's going to be accessible for lots of people. So look at, could they provided a text label for what that red means as well? And also really encourage you to share what you've learned with your colleagues too. So for accessibility and color accessibility to really start to work at scale around the world, we need to teach others how to do things. And I recommend not trying to be too like, oh, you've done that wrong, or this is really bad. Don't use language like that. Use it as like an educational experience. So like, have you thought about how somebody who's got low vision would be able to access this information? And then you can have a bit of discussion around color accessibility. Another additional benefit, which will benefit you alone, is that you're more likely to learn about color accessibility by sharing your knowledge. So one of the best ways to learn is through teaching. So that's an additional benefit of this as well. Okay, so I think that's my time up in terms of the presentation. Now we might move on to Q&A. So I'll hand back to Shimona. But yeah, thank you everybody for seeing through the presentation, and hope you learned a little bit about color accessibility today.
Thanks, Josh. Well, that was really short and sweet, as you all can see. And thank you for all those emojis. That's really nice. We're getting this emoji applause for you, Josh. And I just want to also acknowledge that we have a teammate, Annabeth, in the Q&A box, just answering some of your questions. There are quite a few really, really good questions, so I hope you all stick on for this next segment, which is the Q&A. I just wanted to check with you all as well, because we're getting quite an interesting mix of questions. If this is your first time or introduction to color accessibility, and you've actually you don't know too much about it before, can you just drop in the chat me, and that so we kind of gauge roughly how many beginners we have in this webinar. For the Q&A, we thought about wanting to keep it to scope, because this webinar is meant to be quite beginner focused. So I just want to make sure that we are addressing our audience. Okay, that's quite a few. So yes, once again, if this is you're completely new or quite new to accessibility or color accessibility, drop me in the chat so we can just high five each other in our beginner knowledge. And hopefully that you found that very valuable. As you can see, it is a very short session. It's quite lightweight, but it's your introduction to understand a little bit more about how color affects digital accessibility in general. Just a little plug here. This is very much, like I said, the gateway, and a lot of our courses we actually are dropping out today on pre-orders will take you on a journey from beginner to practitioner, giving you very practical skills. So getting you the knowledge, but also giving you the skills. So if you are interested, we'll talk more about courses at the end. But without more further ado, we'll get to the Q&A. So like I said, let's try to keep the questions a little bit in scope, a little bit more towards the beginner focus. Some of you are a bit experts. And if I do applaud the passion for coming to our webinar as well. And if you have an expert question, feel free to drop it, but we might not prioritize it today. And just so you know, we also did take questions for those of you who, after signing up for the webinar, you went into the little submit your question form and you submitted your questions. We have picked out some popular questions to start off our Q&A with. So we are actually going to answer 3 of those very popular questions. And let's see, we're going to start with the first question right now. We're going to get Josh to address question number 1, and that is how do you fix color contrast issues if the company uses corporate colors? Over to you, Josh.
Yes, great question. We actually had 2 people ask very similar questions around this topic. I love this question. So that's a really hard place to be in. Say if you've got corporate colors, so maybe a brand style guide or something, and those colors are quite challenging to work with from an accessibility perspective. Maybe they're a bit low contrast, those kinds of things. So, I mean, look, the first step is really providing that feedback to the brand team or the marketing team to say, like, these colors are really hard to work with. They might push back on that and say, well, we're just going to live with it now. That was probably actually a fairly common response until we do a rebrand. Rebranding can be quite an expensive exercise. But I still recommend doing that first, because you need to provide the feedback so that when they do come to that point of doing a rebrand or changing the colors, that they actually do take accessibility seriously. So you're really trying to raise awareness within that team, or whoever's making those decisions, that there's an issue here, and yes, we can't address it right now, but can we address it if and when we do some kind of refresh or rebrand. So once you've had that conversation, or you could be lucky and they say, yeah, actually, you know what, we're going to change the colors in our color palette, and that would be a fantastic result. But if that doesn't happen, your second option then really is to go off-brand, where you need to tweak the colors or adjust them in some shape or form. And I won't name anybody today, but there are some large corporates and organizations in Australia who I am aware of had to adjust their colors for their website, so they had to go off-brand. You still might need to talk to the marketing team or whoever's deciding on the brand. But you just need to educate them, and it might just be a case of choosing maybe a slightly different shade of that color to meet the requirements. Or another option, which some organizations do, is they add an additional color in to make the color palette easier to work with. So they're pretty much the 2 options. You could go rogue. It's not probably in my nature to go rogue against these kinds of things, from my employer. But I guess that is a third option. You could just maybe think, oh, maybe no one will notice. I will go off-brand as well. But that's pretty much your 3 options there from my perspective. I could say, yes, somebody's added in the comment, tweak the palette in a subtle way. I think that is the best option until you can actually update the color palette. All right. Moving on to the next question. Oh, Sharina?
Sorry, waiting for you to. Yeah, so question number 2 we have, thanks Josh, is when should we shift to APCA contrast testing? And also for me, what is APCA contrast testing?
So I really like this question too, because I know a lot of people are probably a bit impatient about this. So APCA is a different sort of formula to calculate contrast. So the existing formula that has been in WCAG for quite some time, there are some known issues with it. There's some, specific colors that probably do have strong enough contrast, but the formula says they don't, or the contrast ratio. So it's been discussed when WCAG 3 comes out that it shifts to a different approach, which is called APCA. I can't actually remember exactly what this acronym stands for. Maybe somebody who does could put it in the chat. But a lot of people who are color experts, they know a lot more about color than I would. Are recommending a shift to this because they believe it's more inclusive of some colors that should be considered as more legible than maybe the previous formula says they are. And this is quite an advanced question. So what would I recommend? Well, I would say, yeah, absolutely. If you've got a tool that can test APCA, use it to test your colors, but you're still going to need to conform to WCAG 2.2 at this stage because that is the standards. And in a lot of countries, that's what legislation is still referencing as well. So when it comes to color contrast, if somebody does put a formal complaint in or something like that, they're probably going to look at WCAG 2.2 versus the APCA model. But by all means, experiment with it, learn about it. I don't know when or if that change will happen. But yeah, I would experiment and look at, see if you can meet both requirements, APCA and what was in earlier versions of WCAG as well.
Thanks, Josh. Just shout out to some of our webinar attendees who have been helping in the chat as well. So there's supplementing some of Josh's answers. So if you have access to the chat, have a look there as well. Thanks for writing out what APCA stands for those of you who did, appreciate it. Moving on to question number 3. Is it possible to have more than 3 colors that have sufficient contrast with each other? For example, a graph or chart with 4 or 5 data series distinguished by color alone without using a pattern. Very nerdy.
Yeah, so we got a few questions around charts. And I know there's a lot of people with questions who work in like business intelligence roles or they're designing charts or data and things like that. So when it comes to 3 colors, getting a contrast ratio of 3:1 against 3 colors against each other, it's a really small group of colors that would meet that requirement. So my answer is going to be probably use some kind of alternative cue. A pattern is considered an alternative cue. It's probably not one of my favorites. I think it can cause eye strain. It can be distracting, having lots of different patterns within a chart and things like that. So I generally err towards using text labels or it could even be some kind of icon, like if it's a line chart, maybe you've got triangles and squares representing different lines, but using some kind of alternative cue as opposed to just using color alone within the chart. I'm also really excited about the potential to, and I should say as well, alternative cue could also be a data table. It could be summarizing the chart in text form. Maybe there's a paragraph below it, so that there are also alternative cues as well for somebody who may not be able to read the chart. Chart literacy is really low across the world, so a lot of people have trouble reading charts. I'm really excited about, and I haven't had a chance to really play around with it, the potential of AI, generative AI like ChatGPT, to also summarize visual data visualizations. I've seen some demos, videos of demos and things like that. I think there's, we're on the cusp of something really exciting in that space. And I'm also interested in even being able to, ask questions. So like, tell me what story this chart's saying, telling me, or what message it's conveying, and even in audio form as well. So that could be considered an alternative cue too, and some functionality. If it's a dashboard or something you're working with, where it's live data, we might be able to build into our dashboards sometime in the near future. But at this stage, yeah, I would recommend an alternative cue. So things like text labels, you can put percentages, above a bar chart or something like that. Any kind of alternative cue, so you're not just using color alone.
Thanks, Josh.
Hopefully I've answered the question, yeah.
Once again, also some very helpful suggestions in the chat, as well as some people dropping some links. I want to also add on that obviously we probably can't answer all questions today. So Annabeth has been very, very frantically trying to answer as many as she can in the question and answer box. But for those of you who, because I can kind of guess there's quite a lot of you who are not beginners here with us as well, and you have links, please feel free to share those in the chat as well with other people. That really helps everyone together. And I think a lot of us who are not beginners in the accessibility space, we very much love to advocate and share a lot of resources and knowledge because we love helping to spread the good news. So we have time to, we'll probably pick one more question from the chat, and we have a question here. I'll just read it out from, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, I'm sorry, Imi. So Imi asks, with high contrast, are PDF files opened in the browser affected? Josh, would you like to answer that?
That's a good question. It's probably something I haven't tested lately, and it might depend on the browser itself as well. I know on an iPhone, I've seen PDFs switch to a dark mode. So there's at least some PDFs that have supported that, I think, from memory. But that's one I probably will need to take offline, and will need to do some testing to verify, is it, consistent across the board, or what? I'm not actually an expert in PDF accessibility myself. So yeah, I'll probably
Josh.
Yeah.
No, different standards here. Also, I think Josh and I had this discussion about how when you print something, there's a lot of different factors involved, environmental factors like the sunlight and like the sheen of something, the shine and all these things, which makes it tricky. But let's keep to scope here today. So that, in the interest of time, that is all we have time for today. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. Wait, don't go away. We still have a little surprise for you. Once again, thanks to Annabeth for manning the question and answer box. Also to Deb, who is our tech support, and of course our lovely presenter, Josh. Just so you know, once again, we have the courses that we've mentioned a couple of times. If you're excited about color accessibility, or if you are a beginner, these are really the courses for you. So on screen right now, there is a QR code you can scan with your phone, or you can take a snapshot